Welcome. We are going to be talking about power today and about state power. I was thinking a little bit about, as I was preparing this class, I was thinking a little bit about Bernie Sanders and the Bernie Sanders candidacies. Politics aside, okay, like that is policies aside, whether you're, a Bernie bro or sis or not. It was a complex, and I will say, my politics are probably closer to Bernie's than to some other candidates, but whatever, politics aside, there's some anxiety that I felt around him running. I don't know if anyone relates. On the one hand, he was this kind of like very familiar figure. Like that was like, oh yeah, I have that uncle. We all have, I know that Brooklyn voice. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling like, do we really want a Jewish president? Like, is that good for the Jews? That gives me anxiety. Like, I felt a little uneasy about that. And then I also had some anxiety, I'll admit, around whether a Jewish president would be good to the Jews. Maybe a Jewish president would have to prove all the more so that he wasn't, loyal or, disloyal to the country and loyal to the Jews, right? And so maybe it actually would be bad for us. And that's that. So there's some anxiety that I feel around Jews in politics. And that's, I guess, not unusual, right? I don't like, there's this way in which Jews don't do politics. I mean, we do we march, we do e-car politics, right? But we don't run for office, less so, right? In many parts of our history, that's because we couldn't. But also, I think there is this sense that there's a kind of cultural reluctance that we have to be too close to power. It's cultural and it's historical, and there are reasons for it. But it also is related, I think, to a deeper Jewish ethic, one that is deeply rooted in our texts and in our stories and our tradition, and that is an ethic of suspicion of all human power, of all state power. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, is that the anxiety, the suspicion, and ultimately the question of what do we Jews do with state power? What do we think about state power? How do we relate to the state? How do we relate to it as a subject, and how do we potentially relate to it as an agent of the state? Okay, so let's bring some holiness into our learning with a blessing. We just counted the 30th night of the Omer last night. For those who are still in the game, 30th night of the Omer last night. That means, the tonight is, you know how it works. Okay, let's say a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so to begin talking about the Jewish ethic of state power and the Jewish relationship to power, a good place, a good sort of reference point or set of reference points we can find in Pirkei Avot, in Mishnah Avot, which actually is also a text that we study regularly at this time of year. So here is a source sheet for today, and I want to just start by giving us a couple of very basic references. What do Jews think about the government? What do Jews think about the power? What do the rabbis, I don't know, Jews are manifold, but what does the rabbinic tradition have to say about government? And here are just a couple of classic statements of ethics, but they are two really entirely different ethics. And I want to just present them to you, and then I want to just as a way to get a temperature check here, I want to know, which ethic do you prefer? Which ethic calls to you? Where do you lean here? And let me give you an ethic of suspicion, and then a different ethic, an ethic that is more sympathetic to the state, to the government. Okay, so let's take a look here. There we are. Okay, here's one, Pirkei Avot, and it's Mishnah 2, 3, and then Mishnah 3, 2. Chapter 2, Mishnah 3, and chapter 3, Mishnah 2, if you ever want to just remember where to find these touch points. So the first one is the ethic of suspicion. And it actually isn't even, I could have given you more, it isn't even the first time that such a sentiment is expressed in Pirkei Avot. Even in the first chapter, there is the saying, don't become too familiar with the ruling authorities. In this first statement, the word is, it's not government exactly, it's reshut, which means like the authorities, the one who has dominion. Okay, so be careful, advises this Mishnah, be careful with the ruling authorities, for they do not befriend a person except for their own needs. Be careful with the state, with the government, with the prefect, with the Romans, with the ruling authorities, because they do not befriend a person. They don't literally bring a person close except for their own needs. Nir'in ko'avim, they seem like friends. They seem like they love you when it's to their own interest, but they do not stand by a person in the hour of their distress. Okay, so be careful with authority in general, but with the ruling powers. They'll do you good, they'll seem like your friend when they need you, but they don't stand by you when you need them. Okay, so that's one ethic of suspicion. Okay, so in chapter 3, a very different statement about our relationship, or our suggested relationship to the government. And here, I say government, there's a different word here, which I'm translating as government. The word is malchut, which means kingship. Okay, so the monarch. Rabbi Hanina, the vice high priest, said, pray for the welfare of the government. Mitpalel bishloma shel malchut. Pray for the welfare of the government, which indeed we do every Shabbat. Okay, so this is like the beginning of that tradition. Were it not for the fear it inspires, every man would swallow his neighbor alive. Okay? Were it not for the fear it inspires, every man would swallow his neighbor alive. And I have translated it as man because that is actually the word in the Hebrew. And I wonder, with this reference to violence, in the earlier Mishnah, it was Adam, person. And I wonder if the reference to violence, in light of our last discussion, if we ought to think of it as potentially gendered. But okay, so some different words here: malchut, the kingship, or reshut, the dominion, the authorities. But very, very different ethics, right? Be careful of the government. They're going to use you. They're not really your friends. Stay far away. Don't get too familiar with the government, on the one hand. On the other hand, be grateful for the government. Pray for the government, because the government keeps people safe. If not for the government, it would be chaos. So I want to ask you, if you had to vote for one of these positions, right? Or, as I'm sure you will, if you want to throw in a nuance or two, well, what do you think? Which ethic speaks to you just right off the bat? Do you feel generally suspicious of the state or grateful for the state? Is anybody willing to jump out and take a side there? Florine, you always do me the grace of starting us off. Florine, we can't hear you.
Since I've lived in so many countries, I'm going to take the second one, but with a little different caveat. I really believe in a constitution and a rule of law and a process that goes with it. I do not believe that it's set up, however, to place fear in the members of a community. Rather, it is set up to elevate them to a higher state of consciousness of community and stability.
Okay. So
I would definitely pick living with a state of law.
Okay, so Florine concedes to a basic recognition of the necessary role of the state, and it does create stability, and we do need that, and thank God for some powerful infrastructure that keeps things working and keeps things safe. But Florine doesn't like the description that it keeps us safe by terrorizing us. Although I would say, Florine, I wonder if it's really terror or just power. Right? The idea is that there is an ultimate power, and the in the language of modern philosophy, the state holds the power of violence. And if the state holds violence, that the understanding is we give the power of violence to the state so that we can't we don't have power of violence that we can, right? And if that goes wrong, the state comes in and protects us. So fear, but fear, like there's someone who's going to make sure that you get what's coming to you. So yeah, that's okay. Anybody else, or anyone want to take a different side? Anyone want to say, I'm not going to pray for the government. Hell with the government. Radicals? Come on, my e-car radicals. Who wants to rail against the government here? Florine's back already. You can't be on both sides, Florine. All right, fine. Go ahead. Yeah. Florine, we can't hear you.
What's wrong? I'd like you to define power, because I think you're working on one level of a definition. Power can also be used for effective change and to do good things. And so you're only seeing it as a negative element.
Good. Okay, good. Thank you. You advance us now, Florine, into thinking about what we're going to be like. I remember I started us with Bernie Sanders. We're not just thinking about how we feel about the government and what our general attitude, but what is it? How do we use the government? Like, do we get into the government? Do we harness the power of the state to the benefit of all? Isn't that what it's there for? It's not just there to terrify people into not killing each other. And once we recognize that, then, I was raised as an American, and you go and you bring a bill to Congress and make change, and it's good, and there's a system, and it's orderly, and okay. So yeah, there's an ethic too. Okay, now I've got a bunch of hands. All right, so I'm going to take the hands that are Pal and Kathy.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me is that the two passages, in addition to sort of staking out different points of view, are really talking about different things. I mean, the first one, that, sort of the mistrust, that seems to me, it springs out of the possibility of being involved in the government, the possibility of having inroads into, and this kind of personal connection. The second one is much more about preserving the social order, so it's less personal. And even though that's a very Hobbesian view of the social order, there are other views of the social order that that government can uphold that are easier to be supportive of.
Okay. In which case, we actually might begin to fashion an ethic which has sort of different positions depending on where you're standing. If you're outside the government, then have a healthy respect for it, but be careful not to get too far into the government. Both of those ethics can coexist, says Hal, and I think rightly, and that's a sophisticated analysis. Okay, Janet. Janet, you with us? We can't hear you. I'm going to ask you to unmute. No, you can't unmute yourself?
Okay, now I can. Thank you. So I think at the time the Pirkei Avot was written, we had no power. We were very afraid of the king and all of the king's agents. And I think as we've learned from being citizens in a democracy, we've acquired power first by working behind the scenes to help people get elected, and then ultimately running for office on our own. So I'm not sure that I'm not sure that we can use the Pirkei Avot through the filter of the power that we have in the American Jewish scene, or even in Europe.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good point and question. Just a good cautionary that Janet hands us, which is, to think differently about what is sovereignty, right? Jewish sovereignty, that's one kind of power. Power in a in a democracy where anyone can rise within the system, power in a monarchy where you have to befriend the king or queen in order to, there are all kinds of different relationships, and they might have very different ethics. So I think that is a good cautionary. All right, I want to begin to take us into the Genesis story here. So we just sort of set off kind of pull up a kind of polarity here, right? Suspicion on the one hand and gratitude on the other, and we're already saying it's too simplistic, and we're thinking of different cases, different relationships, different kinds of power that might implicate suspicion or gratitude. Okay. Janet wonders if maybe rabbinic political life was different enough from our own that we're thinking of a whole different landscape. But we're going to go back even further than that. Who is the first Jew to actually ascend to state power? Who's the first Jew to ever hold a government position? Matt's shouting it. Matt, I'll let you shout it. Shout it, Matt.
Joseph.
That is correct. That is correct. Did you want to do, with your hand up, you win the privilege of the floor. Do you have anything you want to add? We can't hear you. Muting is maybe off tonight or something weird.
Yeah, it wouldn't let me do it. You had to do it. I have another ethical way to get to government, if that's a different approach than either of these.
Okay, mention it quickly.
Okay, which is that we all want something. Government is how we all together make decisions. It's either I'm in charge, you're in charge, or we are in charge. Those are really the only options. And liberal democracy is a different kind of government than described in the first one. And it's a different ethical approach. I buy into government because it is the ethical way for you and I to make decisions.
Okay, I get that, and in some ways this echoes Janet's thinking and cautionary just earlier, which is that maybe democracy, best form of government except for all the, like maybe it is actually some advancement in the political structure that the whole point is that we, the people, are governing, and so it isn't as inherently hierarchical, oppressive. But, I mean, come on. At the same time, I think we can all recognize that a lot of the fears about corruption and oppression exist in a democratic society as well, right? That feels true in my country anyway. So okay, yes, and lots to think about there. All right, but Matt's exactly right. Joseph is the first. Abraham didn't have an official position, right? Rebecca didn't have an official position. Jacob didn't have. It's not until Joseph, and actually, Joseph wouldn't have had an official position in the government if not for this miraculous story where he's sold into slave, very dramatic, and he sold into slavery, ends up in jail. Suddenly he's like interpreting dreams in jail, and he gets a reputation that finally makes it back to the Pharaoh who's having these dreams. And suddenly there's a Hebrew slave who is who's able to tell dreams. So bring him out of the dungeon. They bring him out of the dungeon, and Joseph says, "I can tell you what the dreams mean. I can tell you what it's all about, which is that there's a famine coming. There's a famine coming, and we got to prepare." Okay, so as Joseph tells Pharaoh, gives Pharaoh an interpretation, a plan, and the plan pleases Pharaoh. And Joseph is immediately taken and placed into a position of power. And I want us to just look at this moment before we look at how Joseph uses power, which is what our main focus. And I want to just look at this moment where Joseph ascends to power, because it is a moment of great transformation. And so I want us to just look at this passage and be looking at it through the lens of Joseph's transformation. How is Joseph becomes a part of the power structure. So how is Joseph transformed in the process? Okay, so let's just take a look here, and then we'll try to make sense of this transformation. Let's take a look. So Joseph, okay, Joseph says to Pharaoh, okay, that's where we're picking up. So now Joseph is at the end of his speech, his plan, and Joseph says to Pharaoh, let Pharaoh find a man of discernment and wisdom, navon v'chacham here in the Hebrew, and set him over the land of Egypt. All right, vashiteu al eretz Mitzrayim. Right, al eretz Mitzrayim, over the land of Egypt. Both of those phrases we're going to keep paying attention to. A man who is discerning and wise to be set over the land of Egypt. Okay, and let Pharaoh take steps to appoint overseers over the land and organize the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. Let all the food of these good years that are coming be gathered, and let the grain be collected under Pharaoh's authority. Right, the phrase here is tachat yad paro, under Pharaoh's hand, as food to be stored in the cities. So the famine is coming, store up food now. Let that food be a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will come upon the land of Egypt, so the land may not perish in the famine. And the plan pleased Pharaoh and all of his servants. Now, we're going to have to start paying attention to this word, servants, because I could have translated this as, slaves, right? Okay, the word is avadav or eved, and we're going to see that word used here, but that's the same word that we use later in the book of Exodus, which, really is, that is my point. Okay, but let's pay attention to that word. The plan pleased Pharaoh and all his servants, but in this case, I think it's right to translate it as servants, those who are standing around him. And Pharaoh said to his servants, could we find another man like him, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Oh my gosh, Joseph, you really seem to know what you're talking about. You get it. You understand my dream. You know what we should do. Since God has made all this known to you, Pharaoh said to Joseph, there is none so discerning and wise as you. Same language, right? Joseph said, find someone discerning and wise. And Pharaoh says, okay, you're discerning and wise. So you shall be in charge of my house. And by your command shall all my people be directed. Only with respect to the throne shall I be superior to you. So from the bottom to the top, or second to the top, right? Joseph is suddenly, whoa, the second most powerful person in the land. Okay, and now here comes the ceremony or the moment of transformation. Pharaoh said further said to Joseph, see, I put you in charge of all the land of Egypt. And removing his signet ring from his hand, Pharaoh put it on Joseph's hand. And he had him dressed in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. He had him ride in the chariot of his second in command, the special second, like vice presidential chariot. And they cried before him, Avrech, which in Hebrew, it seems to mean, I will bless you, but perhaps is an Egyptian word of the time. And thus he placed him over all the land of Egypt. Okay, that's what Joseph recommended, over all the land of Egypt. And now Joseph's over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, yet without you, no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh then gave Joseph the name Tzafnat Paneach, which we're to understand as his Egyptian name, though it seems to have a Hebrew wordplay, the interpreter of secrets. And he gave him for a wife Osnat, daughter of Potipharah, a priest of On. Thus Joseph emerged in charge of the land of Egypt, over the land of Egypt, same language there. Okay, so what is the transformation? What are the ways in which Joseph is transformed? Just like count them off to yourself, right? Like we saw them. There was there's this ring, there's clothing, there's a name, there's more. What else is it? And I'm not, this is like sort of a gimme question. So I'm just asking you to, there's a new name, there's a ring, there's a chariot. He's paraded around and he's given a wife. Here, you can have a wife. And who is the wife? The wife is the daughter of a local priest. Seems like it was his former master, similar name, but we'll leave that aside. The point is, marrying, we all this like anxiety about intermarriage in the Jewish community. Joseph marries a foreign priest's daughter, okay? So Joseph is like suddenly Egyptian. Like he has the name and the garments and the ring and so why? Why is Joseph wrapped in all of this? Like, what is the significance of Joseph's being why do we need all this detail of the things that Joseph wore and the carriage he rode on and all of that? What's going on with that? Okay. Hannah Jensen.
I think this is so connected to the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that you don't get it for nothing. You don't get it easy. You might get some kind of proximity to power. You might get grandparented in somehow, or you might suddenly have power gifted to you by Pharaoh, but it comes at a cost. You get a new name, you lose the identity of where you're coming from, you get this new wife who also is not of the culture that you're from, that's just given to you, you get new clothes, you get a new identity, and yeah, with that comes accessibility to other things and power and proximity, but what did you lose for that? And also, like the first Mishnah says, he got there because he helped Pharaoh. He got there because he was the only person who could interpret Pharaoh's dream. So as the first Mishnah says, yeah, he was nice to you when he needed you. And he was nice to you when you were able to give him something. And then in order to keep you close, he made all of these other choices for you. There was all of this assimilation that happened, whether you wanted it to or not, for the sake of staying close to power. And there's no indication really of where it sits with Joseph. This just happens and we move on. And there's no indication really of what his emotional state is in this ascension into this strange power situation. And as we see later in his story, he struggles so much emotionally with his brothers, with everything that comes out later, and he ends up crying so much at the end of his story because he's kept so much in for so long that you have to wonder, where did that grief start, or how did it grow, and what kind of pain was he in this period of assimilation, because he felt like he didn't have a choice, because he was being gifted this access to power and that was all he could really see, and he didn't see a way around that.
Wow, that was all so beautifully put. So such a wonderful analysis, Hannah. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to try and like extract the gist of it. What I kept hearing in your description was that Joseph has to sacrifice himself. Like, in order to join the ranks of the powerful, you have to give up your actual self, or at least some part of it. And in this case, Hannah reads this scene like Joseph has to what am I trying to say? To suppress himself, to sublimate himself, to sort of like, and you put it so nicely that in the drama, of the family drama, we see Joseph hiding from his brothers, but maybe that was a mechanism that got started in this moment. What Joseph is being told is, you can have power. You can be one of us. You can be in charge, but you're going to be one of us. You become one of us now. You're Egyptian now. You give up your old self. So in order to ascend to power, one has to sacrifice a certain part of individuality and maybe even identity. Okay, that's a very, very, very nice analysis. Rachel Newman.
I just think the beginning of Joseph's story and the fact that it's like he's transformation after transformation after transformation, because, he's betrayed by his whole family and then suffers this long, experience that is totally out of control, and he's stripped of everything material that he had, material world, that through that whole thing, he continues to keep faith. And, there's points where you sort of wonder in the story, like how he seemed so healed, I guess, in that part where he's, just beginning to interpret dreams, figuring out what that even is, or that he can even, has that ability. But through all that trial, he's stripped of his identity, but he maintains this faith. And then, this other transformation comes, and he's given all of this unexpected power, and he's put in this position where he has to make decisions for and then for his family, and, bring his family back into the fold. It's just, I think this story of sort of emotional transformation for him, it just highlights, always maintains his inner faith, whatever's happening in his external world.
Okay, Rachel, thank you. I love the way you wove together the personal Joseph story with this suddenly this national Joseph story. And it's like a funny thing, like in the storytelling itself, you have this family drama and then just sort of like one of the characters becomes the president, right? So it's like there's something, it's like suddenly there's a huge shift of like there's a huge new dynamic in these, and it will affect, well, first of all, Joseph will be able to manipulate his brothers, but it will also, now we have to think, how does Joseph's new power affect his relationship to his family and how he's going to deal with his family, and how, yes, with manipulation, but as we'll soon see, he's in a position now to grant great favor to anyone, right? The whole world comes to Joseph begging for food. What's going to happen when his family does? How does it change, right? Hannah's description allowed us to see Joseph losing his identity, right? And Rachel brings us to wonder, what is that going to mean for Joseph's life, family, person? Like, how are those relationships going to change? And we'll soon see. All right, I'm going to take 2 hands that are up, Sean and Esra, and then we're going to get into the real the core text that we're going to look at today, where Joseph begins to implement some of these some of this power. Sean.
So I guess that the thing that, and I'm looking around and I see Jeff Zimmerman, who used to work for the city of LA. I'm looking around to see who else has worked in government, to be honest, right? For whom else does this sound really personal? And the thing that I really appreciate about what Hannah said is this notion of the divided self, right? Because there's the role you fulfill and there's who you are, and then the roles you're being asked to fulfill. And what's not, and this goes to your question, and it goes to something Eric said in the chat, which I hope we'll hear from him later, but it's what is the role of yourself? What is the role of your ego? And what is the role of the work that you're being called on to do? And I will say, listening to this as someone who is, has this much power, but it's power, that the temptation is always to believe that you are the most important person to solving the problem. And I'm not sure I have the same idealistic view of Joseph, because I think he gets pretty ruthless. And I think that at some level, what the first Pirkei Avot is warning us is about the ruthlessness of power. It's not personal. There's a switch you have to be able to turn off to say, I know this is gonna suck for somebody when I make a really hard decision. The problem is when you fail to make those decisions and when you allow yourself to let the clothes own the person, right, is that you get sucked into what Eric posted about, and you start to make excuses for power instead of actually looking at what it is and what it means. So I'll stop there. This is, I'm absorbing this, and as you're talking, I'm thinking of situations that I've personally been in and choices that I've personally had to make at this tiny little level, right? But these are real things. And so thank you.
Yeah, excellent, good. So you actually have set us up very nicely for where we're headed, to really start thinking about the decisions that Joseph will soon make, and perhaps make on behalf of the Pharaoh, and working for Pharaoh, kissing up to Pharaoh. That's exactly where we're headed. But you also call out, I think, an extremely important ethic here. And as I suggested before, one that perhaps goes all the way back. And that is not just don't trust the government. Governments, they'll get you. But something earlier, something that actually really is embedded in the person of Pharaoh, which is an idea that any human being who has, no one man should have all of that power, right? Any human being who has too much power, it's like power corrupts, but not just because you're doing favors, but because you're in charge. It's you. You have power. You can do whatever you want, right? And Pharaoh is the perfect example of this in our traditional memory, because Pharaoh is like nearly a god. Pharaoh does battle with God, right? So it's like to be a president, a prime minister, a king, a queen, is to get to a place where you start to get too powerful for our conception of what a human being is, and you start to move towards some kind of ultimate power that in our tradition we reserve for God. Only God has that power, right? So the idea of ego and of self-aggrandizement and all that it's a theological problem. It's a justice problem, but it's also a theological problem. What happens when a person becomes a god in their own eyes? Okay? And we have to think about that. Okay, one last comment from Esra.
Yeah, what a great conversation here. I think three things have come to mind for me. One, looking at the Avot excerpts, I was reflecting on like the different responses of, part of my family being from Iran and my parents who came of age at the time of the revolution and did something kind of unthinkable, which was to engage in political activity, which most of the Jewish community said, no, 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 nose down, head down. Like, just don't do that. You don't engage in politics because that's because of Pirkei Avot 1, the first chunk. You just disengage. You don't even, because to be involved even politically, to try to have a voice means you could be targeted. So anyway, that's just one kind of interesting thing that I've thought about. I just wanted to add that other angle. The other thing relates to whether ethical state, the title of this I saw was The Ethics of State Power. And I've been thinking like, is there like some contradiction in that? Like, is it possible to have state power and ethics in the same sentence, and like the complications of the relationship between power and responsibility and to whom and those that are served? And, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely, of course. But I was thinking also of maybe Foucault, who writes about like how power circulates. And so Joseph, and then maybe Bourdieu, who talks about social capital. I don't know why I'm remembering all this stuff from back in like the day, like critical theory stuff, but I think it's relevant to the Joseph story because Joseph had power before he had power. And what I mean by that is that's what helped him rise to power. He was born with a gift. That gift was his power. That was his social capital. And so it feels chicken and egg like with Joseph, because he had the qualities of leadership that attract and I think made it possible for him to rise to where he did. It wasn't the Peter principle with Joseph. It was not the Peter principle. It was like the guy's got some skills that are so marvelous. The Pharaoh himself is kind of amazed. He does what Pharaoh himself cannot do. So I think Joseph was already kind of in a powerful place and owning it and trying to find a way. The psychology of Joseph is really juicy. I don't think I have a handle on it, but I see it as like he was already in a place of power, and whatever that was doing to him that caused some strain in his familial relationships, what happens to him once he then is given even more of the mantle of the role. Anyway, I'm interested to see where the text goes.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great, you give us the classic phrase, power corrupts, right? But also give us like, French philosophers who really lean into this idea that there's something about power itself, that power has its own power, right? Power sucks you in, and it's not, you just have to be careful. It's not even what you plan to do. It's just, you become a part of the system, and that has its own energy. And we must all be careful around systems that operate in ways that roll right over human life. Okay, so we really have to jump into this text that I've been sort of teeing up this whole time, which is a kind of a strange story. Strange that it appears in the book of Genesis. Like Joseph goes on and implements this plan, and then all of a sudden, people start coming around and asking for it. His brothers come, and that's really where our attention goes. What's up with Joseph and his brothers? And then there's manipulation, and he tricks them, and back and forth and back and forth. That's Genesis. That's our story. And then they get together, and there's a reunion, and they forgive each other, and all the drama and the beauty of this epic tale. And then Genesis seems to come to a close, starts to come to a close. But before it does, before we wrap up with blessings and, the death of one generation, chapter 47 is Genesis 50 chapters on. Chapter 47 suddenly has this story that initially, I don't even know what it's doing here, but it is a story of Joseph. Now, the famine is still going, but the story of Joseph and his brothers, so Joseph is in power. Take a look. Now, this is just a little bit of the Torah is giving us a little bit of the background of what's going on in the big picture in Egypt. And it's very strange. Okay, so let's take a look at how Joseph uses his power here. All right. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers, giving them holdings in the choicest part of the land of Egypt. In the region of Ramses, that's a name we'll pay attention to, as Pharaoh had commanded. Okay, so Joseph has power. He uses his power to get a nice little plot for his family when they come down to Egypt. Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and all of his father's household with bread down to the little ones. That's so nice. Joseph is able to provide for his family. And I say provide for, we see that Joseph has privileges. Joseph he can use his power to be a benefactor to those he loves. Okay, that's Joseph's story. But now there was no bread in all of the world, in all of the land, for the famine was very severe, right? We forgot this famine affects more than just Joseph's famine, it affects everyone. So there's no bread. And by the way, look at the link here that the text makes. Joseph gave everyone in his family bread, lechem, and the very next line is lechem ein b'chol haaretz, but there was no bread in all of the land. Okay, you hear that? Joseph's family gets bread, nobody else has bread. Okay, so there's no bread in all the world, for the famine was very severe. Both the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. So Joseph gathered in all the money that was to be found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan as payment for the rations that were being procured. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's palace. So what's the phrase, follow the money? Follow the money here, because it's interesting. The concern is for bread. We're going to see the people continue to beg for bread. And Joseph gave his family bread. The people needed bread. At the end, they say, give us bread. But Joseph's concern is for kesef. It's for silver, it's for money. So you want bread? Give me your money. And he amasses all the money. And when all the money gave out in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us bread, lest we die before your very eyes, for the money is gone. Okay, so that's the scene. It's getting dire here. They're running out of bread and Joseph's amassing money. And finally they come and said, we're desperate. Give us, we need to eat. It's a crisis. That's exactly why Joseph's been appointed for a crisis. But what does Joseph do? Take a look. And Joseph said, well, bring your livestock and I'll sell it to you against your livestock if the money's gone. Oh, all right. Joseph's finding a way to give them bread, but it's give me more of what you have. Okay, I guess, that's a decision. It wasn't the most loving, compassionate decision, but it's a famine. It's a difficult situation. Okay, but let's just see how this builds. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, for the stocks of sheep, and the cattle and the asses. Thus he provided them with bread that year in exchange for all their livestock. Now he owns all the animals. Okay, but the people ate for one more year. And when that year was ended, they came to him the next year and they said to him, we cannot hide from my lord that with all the money and animal stocks consigned to my lord, nothing is left at my lord's disposal save our persons and our farmland. The only thing we have left is our land and ourselves. Now listen to this line, Chevra, listen to this. Let us not perish. Lama namut, why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Take us and our land in exchange for bread, and we with our land will be serfs to Pharaoh. Now, serfs is how they translate it. What word do you think this is? Avadim. Avadim, leparo. I mean, just take that in for a second. Avadim leparo, slaves to Pharaoh. That's a line where if I say to you, Avadim lepharaoh, that sounds like the Haggadah. The Haggadah, we were slaves to Pharaoh. Avadim hayinu lepharaoh b'mitzrayim. But that's not, the phrasing of Avadim lepharaoh is actually first applied to Egyptians. So Joseph does this. They say, take us, buy us. So Joseph took possession of all the farmland of Egypt for Pharaoh, every Egyptian having sold his field because the famine was too much for them. Thus the land passed over to Pharaoh. Now, I just want to, like, there's a nuance here where it's not clear, did Joseph buy them or just their land? Okay, so we could analyze this text deeply and come up with lots of different interpretations, but I just feel the rhythm of what's happening here. Pharaoh gets all the money. Pharaoh gets all the cattle. And now Pharaoh gets all of the land in Egypt. And then now things get really weird. And he removed the population town by town from one end of Egypt's border to the other, redistributing the population. Only the priests he did not take over, for the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh and they lived off the allotment which Pharaoh had made to them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Okay, so special privileges for the priests. Remember that Joseph is married to one. And then Joseph said that day, whereas this day I've acquired you and your land for Pharaoh. I did it, I bought you. Here is seed for you to sow the land. And when the harvest comes, you'll give 1/5 to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be yours as seed for the fields, and as food for you and those in your household, and as nourishment for your children. And they said, you have saved our lives. We're grateful to my Lord, and we shall be serfs, but now we know the word. We shall be slaves to Pharaoh. Hayinu avadim leFaro. And Joseph made it into a land law in Egypt, which is still in effect today, that 1/5 should be Pharaoh's. Only the land of the priest did not become Pharaoh's. Okay, so here's the question. What is Joseph up to? What's going on here? What's going on here? And, you know, I want to know what Joseph's plan is, what Joseph's thinking about. But I also want to know what is Joseph up, like, what is the meaning of a story where Joseph buys the Egyptians as basically slaves to Pharaoh right before, chapters before we head into the story of being slaves to Pharaoh? How do we understand? What is the significance of this story of Joseph slowly gathering up all of the power, the money, the land, the power, the ownership in the land of Egypt? How do we read this story? What sense do we make of this story? Okay, so let's just start with that. What is Joseph up to here? What is he doing? Alexandra, how do you read this?
So I'm not answering your question directly. I hope that's okay. But what struck me about this is the way that people bargained for their life to be saved by bread. And all of this was about bread and what they were willing to give up for bread, which my mind went back to the Esau and Jacob story, where there was bread. He could have just eaten the bread. And like, to me, it shows such a discrepancy between how starving people will bargain and how one who just says he's starving and who is using histrionics to bargain. And so it supports the, to me, it supports the idea that Esau was like what we had discussed a few weeks ago, that Esau was not sincere. But I don't know, this is sort of an upsetting couple of lines, several lines. And
it really is.
I'm trying to focus on they got to keep 4/5 of it. But yeah, it is a little bit disturbing. Okay,
good. Thank you. So Alexandra articulates for us what I think is meant to be some discomfort here. What's going on here? Like, maybe what we'd like is these people are starving. They're starving. So, it's not about like, oh, well, then give me your cattle. Like, there's something about the tone here in a period of absolute devastation that feels like this isn't the kind of benevolent, caring authority that we want. Has Joseph been corrupted there? But of course, it reads particularly jarring when we know that just a book later we'll be the vulnerable people. Right? We'll be the ones who are, please just help me. I'm just trying to live and survive. So what? Like, you have to wonder here, Joseph isn't just Pharaoh-like. Joseph is like the prelude to our slavery. And so we have to ask, what is the Torah doing here? Why is the Torah setting up basically a kind of a prelude to the Exodus with Joseph as the Pharaoh and the Egyptians as the slaves? Right? There's something going on here. Okay, Debbie Jaffe. Are you there?
Oh, okay, there we go. There we go.
Oh, there
Hi.
you are.
Thank you. Wow, I feel like I've read this so many times and I didn't really pay attention to it. So the first thing that it made me think of is that there's a punishment for Joseph selling out. And there's like a reckoning for him having lost his identity and lost himself, and he was given all these gifts, and that however you want to put it, like put us in this position where he put us there almost. I mean, it wasn't us, I guess it was the Egyptians, but he like set it up.
Yeah.
There's some sort of reckoning. Yeah.
I think that's right. And the language for that in Jewish literature is midah k'neged midah, measure for measure. And I think you're right that the Torah often operates on it, seems to set up a pattern, like you did this, so look at how you get just the opposite. You think you're so powerful, look at how your people, and so there's an interplay being set up between something that Joseph is, and what you suggest, Debbie, is interesting. Like Joseph gave up his Hebrewness. He became a part of the state structure. Maybe there's some lesson here that he too quickly embraced the power of Egypt. And so it's going to come back to bite you, because there is a lesson in here. Or what? What other lessons are here? Noah Schechter.
Hi. This has fascinated me for a long time. I remembered from some learning I was doing with some friends recently about in the Talmud, there's a discussion of a debate between Rav and Shmuel about how does it say a new king arose over Pharaoh? And they tell this story in which one of them said, well, here's what happened. The people were like, let's kill the Jews. And the Pharaoh was like, you guys are idiots. If we're only alive today because of the bread that we have because of Joseph. And the people didn't like that at all, so they deposed him. And Pharaoh's out of power and he's all upset. And then, a couple of days later, they reinstate him. And then he's like, Joseph who? Let's destroy the Jews, which is interesting to me. It's different a little bit than the Rashi explanation that I knew from the Seder, in which the Egyptian people are kind of seeking revenge for something that Joseph really did to them. And that because of the actions of a single powerful Jew, the community is punished. And I think about that a lot today, particularly with a lot of, when Jewish names are in the news for doing horrible things, I really worry, because I think that if history shows anything, it's that the world doesn't need a reason to be unkind to the Jewish people. And sometimes powerful Jews do terrible things. And I think we're caught up in this cycle with powerful Jews misbehaving, and then all of us not knowing or suffering the consequences. And last thing, Joseph should have known better, because Abraham, Egypt's always been bad news, Abraham knew it. We kind of always have to go to Egypt because they're the big power, but we're not comfortable there. We shouldn't be there, seems to be the story that Torah is trying to tell us. And I think that relates to power as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that. So Debbie set us up with this idea of measure for measure. There's something happening here, and so something happens here. And I want to just amplify Noah's version of that, which is that, we could actually read the violent attack on the Jews, the Hebrews, Israel, as seeded by some kind of lingering revenge, feeling of anger and revenge, because you, Joseph, were in charge And you're the one that brought us down. You didn't find a way for us to continue as we were. You stripped us down. What happens? So Joseph does it for Joseph's reasons. Joseph sets up Joseph's family, and Joseph secures his place in the palace very nicely. But what happens years later? What happens years later when you use the power in a way that wasn't just compassion? What happens? And then Noah provides us with a brilliant connection. And with this, we're heading toward the end of the hour. We'll head exactly where Noah pointed us. Did I say Joseph? Noah provides us with a brilliant connection. Where Noah pointed us, which is let's actually look now at if it's measure for measure, it's like measure Joseph for measure Exodus. So now let's take a look just at the beginning of Exodus, exactly where Noah was pointing us towards, when a new king arises, and listen to the way that some of this language now sounds to us so familiar. Take a look here. Take a look at a new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And look, he arose over Egypt. Al Mitzrayim, that's the language that Joseph kept using. You need someone to rule over Egypt. You need someone to oversee Egypt. You need someone to be in charge of all of Egypt. But this one didn't know Joseph. Now, that seems crazy. What do you mean, doesn't know Joseph? And he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. This is the new Pharaoh. Let us deal shrewdly with them. Now, what's the word for shrewdly? Hava nitchakma. Let's be wise. Let's be wise. Let's be crafty. Let's be shrewd. What did Joseph call for? Someone who was wise. Someone who was wise. So now let's us be wise. Joseph was wise. Let's be wise back. Let's deal shrewdly with them so they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. So they set taskmasters. This is the beginning of slavery. They set taskmasters over them to oppress them with force later, and they built garrison cities for Pharaoh. Where were they? Pitom and Ramses. Ramses, the place that Joseph had originally set up his family, this refuge, this secure place, is now a garrison city, a fortress that the Israelites as slaves are forced to build. So everything has turned over entirely here. And I'm not bringing the Rashi that Noah mentioned, but here's another one close by. A new king arose who did not know Joseph. Now, it doesn't make sense. Joseph was the leader of the land. Did they not know Joseph? So following one of the opinions that Noah mentioned, Rashi explains that this means, no, it's not that he didn't know Joseph. It's that he acted as if he didn't know Joseph. He acted as if, pretended. Suddenly, the fortunes turn, and I don't know who you are, and I don't remember Joseph, and I don't remember any of your privileges, right? All of a sudden, all of that is forgotten. And if I may, right, this line here, he acted as if he didn't know Joseph, I think reminds me of that very first Mishnah that we looked at. Be careful. They seem like friends when it's to their own interest, but they don't stand by a person in their hour of distress. But it's much more than that, right? Because Joseph isn't just a person in his hour of distress. He's the former leader of the country, right? And now all of a sudden, it's like it's coming back to bite him. Now, I'm not blaming Joseph for slavery in Egypt. I'm just saying there's a relationship being pointed to here. There's some kind of ground that was seeded there in chapter 47 in the book of Genesis, and there's some kind of message that we have to be very, very careful with what we do with state power. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of our time. There's a lot here. There's a lot of like, and I don't want to make, you know, there's a piece here from Nachama Leibowitz, which starts associating with this like communism and, you know, different theories of political order. But just as a work of literature, I think you can see how the one story is suggesting, is pointing to, is asking us to consider what brings us to a state of injustice, right? And what role did we play in any of that? Rabbi Brous, any thoughts before we close? No? Okay. So then we'll see you next week for what I think is our last of these classes. Rabbi Brous will be teaching. So please come back and join us next week. Wonderful learning with you all. Thanks so much for your Torah tonight.
So good. Thank you. Shukra.